Well, good morning, family. Every opportunity I get to spend with the Memorial Road Church and staff, I'm always so encouraged. I appreciate Mark, the elders here, for entrusting me with your time and this moment of worship, and I am honored to be here with friends. When Phil invited me to be here, I was excited because we do have a lot of friends here at Memorial Road. Those of you who don't know me, I'm usually hanging out over at Wilshire, where I've been for about 15 years. And as Mark said, preachers don't always get to sneak away from church. And so when you get an invitation to be somewhere else, you have to think, how many Sundays do the elders let me be away? Is there something going on that I can't miss here? And then when Phil said you don't have to wear a tie, I said, I'm there. I don't have to be at Wilshire today. And then I started thinking, we're looking forward to being with a lot of friends and good acquaintances from years over, and then all of them are out of town this week, almost. Some of you are still here, and I don't know, in research they say correlation does not equal causation. I don't know if they found out I was coming and left, or if it just happened to land that way. But if you're a friend of someone that I've known for years, thank you for staying today. I'm glad to be with you. Phil has spent part of the summer in the Psalms, and so he graciously invited me to take a moment this morning to reflect and to jump back into that series. And so I hope you'll join me in Psalm 29. Psalm 29, and I readily admit that this is not one of the more familiar songs among the church. I can't ever recall hearing a sermon that I didn't preach from Psalm 29. I've never been sitting in someone's living room and sing this crocheted on a pillow or hanging off the refrigerator. It doesn't have the imagery of a Psalm 23 or the notoriety of Psalm 119. But if the scholar William Holiday is correct, Psalm 29 may be one of the oldest psalms in our Bible. So join me in the reading of Psalm 29. Ascribe to the Lord, O heavenly beings. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Worship the Lord in splendor of holiness. The voice of the Lord is over the waters. The God of glory thunders. The Lord over many waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. The Lord breaks the cedars of Lebanon. He makes Lebanon to skip like a calf and Syrian like a young wild ox. The voice of the Lord flashes forth flames of fire. The voice of the Lord shakes the wilderness. The Lord shakes the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord makes the deer give birth and strips the forest bare, and all in its temple cry, glory. The Lord sits enthroned over the flood. The Lord sits enthroned as king forever. May the Lord give strength to his people. May the Lord bless his people with peace. And that's Psalm 29. Now there are some people who have this great ability to look at a picture, to watch a movie, and immediately find this deep meaning behind it. At our house, my daughter loves The Greatest Showman. In fact, that movie is just almost on a continual loop in my living room. And my wife has this incredible ability to watch the movie and to see things in it that I had no clue was even there. It'll show a scene that I've seen 1,000 times now. And my wife will say, have you ever noticed that the people in that building are contrasted with a cemetery right beside it? Just as the music is talking about dead men walking. No, I didn't get that. I was watching a movie. My wife has this great ability to do that. Some of you are familiar with Vincent van Gogh's famous painting, Starry Night. And if you look at that painting, to the average casual observer, it's a pretty painting. There are lights, stars, there's a village out there. The trained eye will catch things that the average observer will miss sometimes. You notice the way the church kind of in the center of this painting, and the color and the lights kind of move out from that. Art critics will tell you there's something significant in the fact that the church is dark, but that the color splashes the image. I never noticed that. I just saw a cool painting with a lot of cool pictures. But to show you just how non-deep a thinker I am, that's what you want to hear the preacher say on Sunday, right? It's kind of a tradition at my house on Sunday nights. My children and I go home and we eat nachos for dinner. My wife does not participate in this ritual. She cares about health. I, on the other hand, like nachos. And so, for years, my children and I go home and we eat nachos. Have you ever noticed on a bag of Tostitos, some of you will not even be shocked by this, but if you look at a bag of Tostitos, the two T's are actually two people dipping a chip into salsa. How many of you knew that? Yeah, some of you are lying. I've eaten nachos almost every Sunday night of my life, and I never noticed that until someone pointed that out. It's a simple picture, but what a meaning. Now I want you to look at Psalm 29, because as you read Psalm 29, it kind of lands that way. That you read this, and on the surface of Psalm 29, there's a wonderful meaning, a beautiful meaning. And as you keep reading this psalm and listening to the voicing of this psalm, you notice there are other things happening. This oldest psalm of our book of Psalms, perhaps, I believe, has a very modern message. When you first start reading the song, you catch a glimpse of something familiar to those of us who grew up in central Oklahoma. There's water, thunder, flood, flashing fire, the wilderness shakes, and all this sound, this massive Mediterranean storm sweeps through, and a deer gives birth in the midst of this. It's a thunderstorm. Now, I spent a lot of time in prayer to make sure the Lord would coordinate last night's storm with this morning's sermon, and it worked out beautifully. You read Psalm 29, and on the first reading, it's someone watching this storm move through the area. Now, I want you to notice Psalm 29 begins with this invitation to praise, this invitation to worship. And it's not an invitation for you and me. Ascribe to the Lord, and he's calling the heavenly beings. And they're watching this storm move through this area. And when they see the lightning and the thunder and the wind and these cedar trees just shaking and landing on the forest floor, there's this hush that goes through the heavens. And the only response, glory. Now, we've had a mildly slow storm season in Oklahoma this year. Aren't you grateful for that? But have you ever watched some of our weathermen when one of these storms is ripping through Oklahoma, and the language that they use? I love them, and listen, they've saved countless lives. But there's just something odd about listening to a weatherman stand in front of a map, pointing out your physical address where this tornado is about to rip through, and they say, "That is incredible, that is impressive." No, it's not. It's going to level my house. But that's the image you get of these heavenly beings in Psalm 29. They're watching this incredible storm rip through the area. And the writer of Psalm 29 says they stand back, and their only response, glory. It is, if you will, Israel's version of How Great Thou Art. You're familiar with that song. Song we just sang. I even understand that at this church a few weeks back, you guys had something of a championship bracket trying to decide the best hymns in the church. And How Great Thou Art made it to the final four. That's impressive. But can I say, what ministry staff has time to do this? I mean, they're not here. You can admit it. That's weird, isn't it? I understand it was Andy that did that. Can I also point out Is this not Memorial Road Church of Christ? And our God is alive is not number one? Come on, brothers and sisters. You're going to have to change your name voting like that. How Great Thou Art is one of these magnificent songs in the history of the church, going back to the 1800s. And you guys have heard the story of the author caught in a thunderstorm, amazed by what he sees before God, and he pins those words. That when he sees all of this, the stars and the rolling thunder, the power throughout the universe displayed, and then sings my soul, how great thou art. That is what Israel is doing in Psalm 29. This storm, this power, this incredible strength of God. The angels or the heavenly beings respond in glory. So when you first read through Psalm 29, on the first level, the first reading, there's this clear message. Our God is awesome in power. There is no one, there is no God, there is nothing more powerful than our God. What a remarkable message for Israel. A few years ago, my family and I traveled to Door County, Wisconsin. And not far outside of Door County, there's a place called Sunset Beach where you can sit and you can watch the sunset over Lake Michigan. And it's a remarkable place. We went towards the evening time, and there we gathered on this kind of peninsula-type landing area. And other people just came to meet and to sit and watch the sunset. And as the sun began to sink down into the Lake Michigan, everyone just started to applaud. It was remarkable that it's a sunset. How many sunsets have you seen in your life? And this one, this time, they watch this. And they feel like they've got to give praise, that they've got to give attention and glory somewhere out there. In Psalm 29, the psalmist says, that glory belongs to our God. What a message. Important message. But you read this psalm more closely, and you begin to notice other things in this psalm. You begin to look at the contours and movement of Psalm 29. It's worth noting, many of you know the name Glenn Pemberton. Glenn wrote a book on the Lament Psalms, and he makes a note of something there in the Lament Psalms. He says, like other ancient civilizations, the unpredictable, unstable, and life-threatening seas and storms come to symbolize all the chaotic forces that stand against human life. You see, what Glenn talks about is sometimes when you read the language of storms and water in the text, that there's more going on than what first meets the eye. Our Bible opens with this story. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The Spirit of the Lord hovers above the waters. In the ancient Near Eastern religions, there was these theories of creation coming out of chaos and God's battling out of the waters. And the claim of Genesis 1 is that God is above all that. And when you look at this message of Psalm 29, and you begin reading through here, it makes some remarkable claims. For instance, the text will tell you that the Lord is over the waters in verse 3. That the Lord is enthroned over the flood, verse 10. That the claim of Psalm 29 is that God is bigger than all of this chaos that you're witnessing. Now, it's, again, mere coincidence that I speak on this text after a thunderstorm last night. I talked about Psalm 29 during the NBA playoffs one year when the Thunder were in the hunt. And the whole church thought it was going to be kind of this pep talk about the Thunder squad. because the title of the sermon was God of the Thunder. It gave them hope. Listen, this season, with some of the personnel changes, you may want to hang on to this if you're a Thunder fan, God of the Thunder. But the image of Psalm 29 is that this water and all of these chaotic forces out there, that with everything happening, with the wind and the lightning and the rain and the snapping of cedar trees and all the chaos in the world around us, God is over it. God sits above the chaos. And then you hear this prayer of Psalm 2:29. May that same God, may the Lord give strength to his people. May the Lord bless his people with peace. To put that note in this psalm is like the psalmist saying, I want the God that can send that storm. And I want this God who can shake those cedars. And I want the God who can send that lightning. I want that God to take that power and give strength to his people. And in the midst of all the chaos, I want that God to give peace, shalom, to his people. This claim that God sits above the chaos wasn't just something they needed to hear in Psalm 29. You watched the news lately? There is political chaos everywhere. There is racial chaos and tension everywhere. Regional chaos everywhere. But it's not just on your screen. For us, it's in our lives. There's chaos in some of our homes, our marriage, children. Some of us have chaos at work. Our boss, our fellow employees, the very task we're called to creates a sense of chaos. For some of us, there's chaos in our checkbook. There are more bills than there are money, and I don't know what I'm going to do. For some of us, there's chaos at work in our own body. What doctors tell us, what medicine does, what the prognosis is, there's chaos all around us. But the claim of Psalm 29 is that our God is bigger than the chaos surrounding us. That message is often a message that shows up in Scripture at interesting times. There is the famous call, Isaiah is called in the interesting times. Isaiah was one of the longest. Isaiah's going on is undoubtedly. Isaiah's died. I saw the Lord, and did you the Lord, and did you Isaiah died. Isaiah's revelation. Just facing people questioning God is going on as persecution. Or as you hear voices in Revelation crying, persecution, the church. Persecution, the church. Persecution. John is in something, or as you hear voices. Chapter 4, one of the. John is in something. John is in something, or as you hear voice, still seated on his hear voice. The church is John is in something, or as you hear. Psalm 29 is making the claim. The church is John is in something, or as you hear everything happening within us. Thursday afternoon, sitting with a sister in Christ who's 83 years old, husband. Now, I had enthroned above the chaos creates a bit of tension at times, because if he's enthroned above the chaos, why is there chaos? Psalm 29 is a statement of faith in the midst of this. It is a God sits enthroned. And that prayer of benediction is the prayer that we all seek, that God will use that same power to bring peace in the life of these people. You look at this psalm and you see this deeper meaning, that the chaos that surrounds us is not bigger than the God that we serve. Now, if we stop there, if that's all we read in Psalm 29, that's pretty good. You know, I've watched Greatest Showman thousands of times and enjoyed that movie before my wife gave deeper meaning to it. But there's one other thing, and it may be my favorite thing about Psalm 29 that is fantastic. There's this story or kind of a folklore that goes around a lot of churches. If you ever study hymnology, or people will talk about, you know that some of our church hymns actually were old bar tunes or secular songs that we stole the tune to and we put spiritual words to them. It makes for a great story. Turns out it's not all that true. At least not often. We have a few small cases of that. Some of our teens are used to singing at camp, "I have a peaceful, easy feeling." And their parents look at them like they're weird. Because parents remember that from the 70s and the old Eagles tune. And when I sang that song as a kid, it was not about worship. But what we've done is we've co-opted the language of another tune. And we've put it in service to God. That's okay. The salvation through Christ, the grace of the Lord brings this peaceful easiness about us. Here's the thing about Psalm 29, and perhaps my favorite. When you read this text, you'll notice these interesting descriptions. You have this image of God as the one who sends this impressive and powerful storm. You notice that the voice of the Lord in Psalm 29 thunders, and it thunders 7 times. You find it in verse 3, twice in verse 4, verse 5, verse 7, verse 8, verse 9. The voice of the Lord, the voice of the Lord, the voice of the Lord. And those descriptions are notable to the early readers or singers of this song, because these were images most notably used to describe an Old Testament villain who you and I have met in the form Baal. Baal was the one in the book of Judges that the children of Israel did that which is evil in the sight of the Lord, and they go off and they worship the Baal. Or one of the great stories of the Old Testament, a great VBS-themed story, is 1 Kings chapter 18. You've got Elijah confronting the prophets of Baal. You remember that story? And Elijah is there, and the prophets of Baal are there. He says, "You pray to your gods, and I'll pray to my God, and whichever God can light the altar, that's the God we'll serve." And through the power of lightning, it appears, God zaps the altar and proves his deity over Baal. Baal's supposed to be the one to control thunderstorms and lightning. So one scholar, Walter Brueggemann, says of Psalm 29, "Indeed, it is the scholarly consensus that Psalm 29, this is an older Canaanite psalm taken over by Israel, wherein only the name of the deity has been changed." Now, whether that's true or not, there's some interesting things to note about this. These are descriptions often used of Baal. Those who paid better attention in Hebrew than I did note that if you take the name Yahweh out of Psalm 29 and replace it with Baal, the poetry seems to flow a little better. That might explain the opening of Psalm 29 that invites all the heavenly beings, or some of your translations might say gods, and says, "Come here, all you gods, and watch what happens here." But what seems to be taking place potentially in Psalm 29 is that Israel said, "That song that you're singing about Baal describes our God. The glory you're offering to him belongs to our God. Yahweh is the one who controls the storm. Yahweh is the one who is over the chaos. Yahweh is the one who will bring peace. No one else, nothing else, no other God, Yahweh." And the claim of that reading of Psalm 29 is that our God is worthy of all glory and praise. How often do things happen in life where we just chalk it up to coincidence or luck? How often does the glory belonging to our God actually get sent somewhere else? Another remarkable story from this week in my ministry is we got an email to one of our deacons at work about someone who's lived in the Oklahoma City area for 10, 20 years. She's in her 70s. She has no family. She has no friends. She's not part of any church home, and she's been diagnosed with cancer. And they emailed our deacon, who emailed one of the elders, and emailed me, and asked, "Is there something we can do to reach out to her?" We went, we met her, we visited with her, we're praying with her and praying for her. But in a meeting, people began to talk about, how did this happen? Oh, it's lucky she knew. Fortunate she... No. That glory belongs to God. Next time you catch yourself about to say, "Whew, that was lucky." No, that's not lucky. You see, the claim of Psalm 29 is that the glory that's given to others actually belongs to our God. He's worthy of all praise. As people of faith, God calls us to be the ones to give that glory and praise to him. It's always interesting to me to look at how people use text in Scripture. There's actually tradition, people who are kind of a high church kind of feel, who follow what's known as the common lectionary, take Psalm 29 and they read it at an interesting moment in the life of Jesus. It's actually, this year, it was January the 7th, in what's known as the Sunday after Epiphany, or the appearance of the Lord. And they read Psalm 29 in conjunction with the baptism of Jesus. It's an interesting text. Psalm 29 praises the God of the thunderstorm, who speaks in seven thunders, who pronounces peace. And they see this text and they lay it over the top of the baptism story of Jesus, who goes into the waters, who comes out of the waters, and a voice from heaven thundered, "This is my son." Our claim as God's people is that all glory and praise belongs to him, but that when Jesus Christ entered the world, John said, we beheld his glory. And that this incredible power that's at work in Psalm 29 to break cedars, to send a storm, is the same power at work in the cross of Jesus Christ. And just like a storm that people see and are frightened, people see a cross and they were terrified, and God through that cross brings peace and strength to his people. So that when God sees his people, the angels, the competing forces of power, they say glory. It's interesting to note that picture, The Starry Night by Van Gogh, Some people have noted that in Van Gogh's life, he grew up wanting to be a minister. Now, for various reasons, the church rejected him, didn't want him to be a minister. So he went out and he did ministry and worked among the poor in such squalid positions. And the church came to observe his ministry, and they were so embarrassed by the state and the condition that he lived in that the church instead said, "You're not going to be a minister." And so some art critics have observed that when you look at Van Gogh's Starry Night, there's a reason that church is dark. That it was in his own life the church had gone dark. But that light that's supposed to be in the church had actually, from Dutch Reformed theology, spread out and was being seen in the creative glory of God. Brothers and sisters, here's our call for this week. Jesus calls us to let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. And just like that heavenly host who gathered to watch that storm in Psalm 29, the only response to the power and peace at work in the Church of Jesus Christ. I know I'm a visitor to this church, but I know this church prays for people who want to know Jesus Christ. And if you're here this morning and you do not know that power and peace of God that